here is JD Vance, and this is just, this is a warped worldview that is based in a deeply religious fundamentalist mindset. And as opportunistic as JD Vance is, this sounds like a guy who's really spent a lot of time thinking about this. This is not, this is completely consistent with Peter Thiel's ideology. There is no doubt in my mind that many aspects of JD Vance's worldview have been shaped after, the 10 or 12 years that he's been under the tutelage of Peter Thiel. And Peter Thiel, remember, believes that women's suffrage is a problem because it makes things more democratic, and more democracy leads to socialism. I don't know if it's a direct quote, but it's pretty close. And here's Peter Thiel sort of like backfilling some of the ideas about women and their capacity to have a say over their lives within the economic world, within society at large. And here's JD Vance. He's really thought about this stuff.
And I wouldn't say that I have fully developed views on this, but to me, what it is sort of a value system to replace.
Go back. Can we go back just a little bit more? You started from the very beginning there. Yeah, go ahead.
And I wouldn't say that I have fully developed views on this, but to me, what it is sort of a value system to replace the fact that they're all fundamentally atheist or agnostic. They have no real value system. Their only value system is achieve.
Pause it for 1 second. Now, this is in response to the questioning about professional women, and it came out of like a conversation he had about going to Yale Law School and how some people there are encouraged to go and work, become McKinsey consultants, or become, oddly enough, VC people, and that they're told that's what their value is. Now, look, if you're going to Yale Law School, a lot of those people already are headed in that direction. Although I will also say that Yale also sends people into public service. He doesn't talk about public service at all here. This is not a...
He and I have to definitely debate. That's what I love.
Sorry, that was...
Sorry, my elbow accidentally hit my soundboard.
But this is JD Vance, and they're going to pretend this is a critique of Yale Law School. But no, this is a critique... He's saying of like people who don't subscribe to his religious fundamentalism, that they're searching for meaning and they may find it in their careers, which, look, you can search for meaning in all sorts of different things, whether, it's a personal choice for people, whether they do it in their careers or not. I got news for him. Donald Trump did not search for personal meaning in his families, folks, just to be clear. But here's JD Vance with his, not completely rock solid views on it, but he's thought about this.
And I wouldn't say that I have fully developed views on this, but to me, what it is sort of a value system to replace the fact that they're all fundamentally atheist or agnostic. They have no real value system. Their only value system is achieve in a very conventional way.
Pause it. Now, just to be clear, don't take it down. Just for you at home who are keeping track, if you do not have religious fundamentalist views, you have no value system.
That's because
he believes it's impossible,
right,
for people to develop a value system absent being under the auspices of a religious edict.
The idea that somehow they're pursuing racial or gender equity is like the value system that gives their life meaning. Well, of course, they all find that value system leads to misery, leads to unhappiness. And so
can you pause it? Actually, I'm sorry. So they find that they all find that, right? He's just, that's the fallacy. He jumps immediately to the fact that everybody who undergoes this value system or who abides by said value system is unhappy. He just takes that as a given, and then that's the rest of his premise, which we know is not true. So you just see how many untruths here are layered.
If you are for equity or social justice in any way, you're bound to be miserable.
All, he says.
I suppose all the happy religious people.
Yeah, like he exudes just real happiness and joy right here.
Leads to misery, leads to unhappiness. And so I think that what happens is, like, whenever you really pursue something, right? Like let's say a doctor gives you a medicine to cure a disease and it doesn't work, right? The patient gets worse. Well, you can conclude one of two things. Either the medicine isn't working, or the patient was so sick that what they need is even more of the medicine that you originally prescribed. And I think the gender inequity stuff is like, we need more of the medicine. Okay, clearly this value set has made me a miserable person who can't have kids because I already, passed the biological period when it was possible. And I live in a 1,200 square foot apartment in New York and I pay $5,000 a month for it. But I'm really better than these other people. What I'm going to do is project my
Pause it for a second. Now, he is specifically talking about women who are in menopause or postmenopausal, and they believe in equity and social justice. I mean, this is, and I want to be clear, this is in 2021. This is, prior to him realizing that the Trump strategy was going to be, let's just get a bunch of 22-year-old men to vote for us who are really into wrestling. In many respects, this is why J.D. Vance was picked, not the other way around. They decided their strategy going into the RNC was, we're going for hardcore men. Hardcore, we're going full in. Men is going to be, we're going to try and do this on a gender basis, ironically enough. And that's why we're going to have wrestling. We're going to hit a specific target. They resent women who are, maybe their boss. They resent, this is the way we're going to go for it. And this is before they knew that Harris would be the nominee. Yep. This was their plan. And so they're like, this is our strategy. And Trump Jr. goes, I got just the guy who can do this, because he's been out there talking to the Rogan crowd forever.
It's on my podcast.
He gives it an intellectual sheen.
Yep.
He's thought about this.
This is a right-wing populism for you, just so you guys know, which is a fallacy, because you can essentially see how over 50% of the population, and of course more, but just at the outset is excluded from this vision of right-wing populism.
It is a right-wing populism, but let's be clear. This is not an economic populism.
No.
And this is a populism that is driven by either first or second order religious fundamentalism. They're not selling religious fundamentalism to these Rogan viewers. They're selling everything that comes out of that.
Hierarchy.
The hierarchy, in this instance, the patriarchy. Patriarchy is just a hierarchy, except for just means that it's always the guy who's on top.
And then they call it moral values, right? That's exactly what religious is. When they say that the liberals are godless and they don't have value systems, what they really mean is that they don't abide by religious hierarchies.
Better than these other people. What I'm going to do is project my racial and gender sensitivities on the rest of them. And the reason that our society is broken is because these people don't think the exact way that I think. Even though the way that I think has made me a miserable person, I just need to make more people think like that. So we're going to teach this in our schools, in our universities, even in our elementary schools, because once everybody agrees with me, then everything will finally come full circle, and we'll have a happy, healthy society.
Women are often misdiagnosed by doctors because their pain is not taken seriously, specifically male doctors. And I just want to point out that J.D. Vance in this entire premise, when he talks about medicine, never once questions if his diagnosis is correct. He immediately says that all liberals and people who don't abide by his ideology are unhappy and miserable, and then goes into the whole medicine analogy. But do you ever kind of question whether or not your underlying diagnosis of said liberal women is correct? Are they unhappy? Have you taken a poll on this front? Of course not, because he doesn't really care about their unhappiness. He cares about the control that he can use, or the propaganda value.
And let's be clear, this is total projection. I mean, you can see it even embedded in this entire thing. The idea that they're trying to impose their values, their lack of values on the rest of us. This is a guy who's out there saying these people have deviated from the religious fundamentalism that I pursue, and therefore Not only are they godless, not only are they aimless, they are valueless, and they are unhappy, and they are trying to promote this. And then he's sort of like, where he stops thinking about this is where he has to say comes full circle. Because there is no way to interpret that. That's him basically saying, like, I've decided to stop thinking about this now. Like, they're going to teach inclusion, they're going to teach equity to everybody, and then it comes full circle.
Yeah.
Like, what does full circle mean there?
Yeah.
That means that everybody has inclusion and equity, and I don't want to go there. I don't like that. That's not, what he doesn't want to do is he doesn't want to make it explicitly clear that inclusion and some type of equality amongst people is fundamentally against his world vision. And he doesn't want to make that explicitly clear. So he has to basically say, well, I just got into a cul-de-sac. It comes full circle. Yeah. We're done with conversation.
And, you mentioned the economic versus cultural thing. In his introduction to the Project 2025 thing, Mr. Vance argued that economic struggles were inextricable from what he saw as cultural decay, suggesting that fixing the state of American life required not just proposals about trade, blah, blah, blah. He said, quote, culture, in other words, must serve as the beginning of the conversation, not the end of one, and proper conversation about culture will never be used as a weapon, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, so we're not going to talk about, we'll recognize that people are hurting in the Rust Belt, but we have to talk about our values first.
This is the game that this whole crew of Peter Thielites will play. They will pretend like we're not going to engage in identity politics. We're not going to engage in the culture war. We're not going to engage in any of that. But that's all they're doing. I mean, that's, I don't really pay much attention to Glenn Greenwald anymore, to be honest with you, because people just don't seem to, broadly speaking. But this was the game that he was playing in those early days. I'm not going to engage in the culture war. But the fact is, yes, you are engaging in the culture war. You're undoubtedly doing. I think he now is a little more explicit, in the way that he's doing. But this is the game that they're playing. I'm not going to talk about identity politics. This woke stuff. Again, everybody engages in this if you're a member of society. It's just a question of what is considered normal and what is considered abnormal. The idea of cancel culture existing. Cancel culture has always existed. We've made this clear time and time again. It's just that the difference is, look, Phil Donahue just died. Or I guess it was a couple of weeks ago. But Phil Donahue was the only person who could get on television and be even skeptical towards the Iraq war. And that was because he had a 30-year hit under his belt. And then he was canceled. But nobody was decrying cancel culture at that time. And let's be clear, this is just some white dude. It's right down the pike. It was a different era where it was like you didn't even get scheduled unless you were of a specific bandwidth. White guy believing XYZ.
And what's incredible about this branding of this as being populism, right-wing populism, and you see a lot of newer, more online right-wing influencers engaging in this, is that it's fundamentally against a majority of the population, their worldview. It's a minoritarian vision. So it's an anachronism. But I think it's also not popular when you get down to everyday people, and it's reflected in how people are responding to JD Vance, who, by the way, this bears repeating, does not come off as a happy guy as he talks about how everybody else is miserable. And I think that's a problem for him.
Looks like a My Chemical Romance roadie.
Exactly.
I reference Corey Robin's reactionary mind, but this is what they will do on the right.
Yeah,
they will pretend that they are fighting the power, when in fact what they're doing is simply reinforcing the existing power structure, right? Like, I'm fighting against. I'm daring enough to speak out against this sort of woke mind virus that's out there. But really what you're doing is and they know this, or I think they know this, they are speaking in support of a pre-existing hierarchy that has existed for millennium. That's what the reactionary mind does. They just dress it up. It's, from the free market Fonzie through to, whomever, your latest sort of like libertarian, your favorite new sort of quasi non-self-identified libertarian.
Free market Fonzie being, I think, Nick Gillespie from a recent magazine, right?
Exactly. You don't hear from him as much. Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.